In Andalusia, we visited magnificent Moorish sites, such as the Alhambra in Granada, and we found the Jewish quarters in all these towns and how close the communities were. And we know, mindful of the Spanish Inquisition, which drove Muslim and Jew to seek sanctuary in Africa in the Maghreb, where the Jews were welcomed with open arms. The saga is part of what scholars refer to as the golden age of Arab and Jew. The great Saladin was exemplary. After liberating Jerusalem from the Crusaders, he accorded freedom of worship to Jews and Christians, where once Jews and Muslims had been persecuted by the Crusaders. I've travelled in the Middle East from Damascus to Iran, where one sees inspiring testament to those times. The Jews who resided in such historic places for centuries did not suffer from anti-Semitism, as was the case in Europe. They resided amongst the people. They spoke Arabic. In fact, quite frankly, they were Arabic, with a different creed. They enjoyed freedom of worship. Their livelihood and culture flourished and differed only in the creed they followed. Those who have misused religion down the ages have done so to create divisions for their own nefarious interests. All the more important the example that you set here. And of course, the example that our people of the Cape have shown in terms of the religion that's practiced. In the conflicts we face today in the world, we need to rediscover how the people of the book cohabited peacefully together and be reminded that their value systems springs from the same source, a love of peace and justice, and of doing, as the Jewish sage Hillel stated, of doing unto others as you would wish them do unto you. That's quite frankly what I owe my mother and father growing up in apartheid South Africa in this place called Yeovil in Johannesburg, because they were quite unique, quite frankly, amongst the Jewish and the white community in terms of that simple message which kept my mind open all my life. I'm going to turn to the Old Testament now to illustrate points I seek to convey concerning an issue that touches us all, an issue symbolized by this flag over here. And I'm quoting from the Old Testament book of Numbers 13 as follows. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the people of Israel." And Moses said to his spies, "Go into the Negev and the hill country and see whether the people in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor." I'm going to take issue here not with the Bible, however one may seek to interpret its narrative, because much of it is symbolic, but the way it has been used, or I'll say abused, by Zionism, which emerged in the latter part of the 19th century as a political doctrine. From its inception, it faced hostility from the rabbis and from socialists and communists who rejected its thesis. The Zionists, who generally were agnostics, by the way, seized the idea of a promised land, which they alleged was a land without people, for a people without land, in reference to the Jews. What the biblical narrative shows, as archaeology and historical account demonstrate, was the Holy Land was ruled for centuries by a Canaanite kingdom. Kingdoms fall and rise and disappear in history, along with their absolute rulers. But the people stay there. They're there. They continue to cultivate the land, to trade and so on. They're not all, and it's a great myth of Zionism about the Jews of Palestine, Holus Bolus exiled and forced away back to Rome or wherever. Yes, an elite were, but the people remained. Canaanites were a pagan people, which was the case throughout the world at the time. As the first monotheistic faith emerged, which we know was the Judaic faith, many pagans became converts. Then with the rise of Christianity and then Islam, this saw the spread of the religions of the people of the book, the three having much in common, emerging as they did from the same tree. So undoubtedly then, the Canaanite people and the numerous tribes you read about in the Bible, from Hittites and Hebrews and Philistines, merged through conversion and conquest over centuries into the belief systems we know. The contemporary Israeli scholar, a man called Shlomo Sand, has articulated this in an outstanding book called The Invention of the Jewish People. Experience of the Holy Land through interaction with its people is instructive. I recall visiting the West Bank town of Kilkilia, which is virtually enclosed by Israel's apartheid wall, and the mayor there greeted me with the words, "Welcome to our Canaanite town." It is really ironic that the Palestinian people today are in all likelihood the very descendants of those ancient Hebrews and Hittites and Canaanites and so on. And these are the people who are being dispossessed and brutalized, as we know. Of course, this ethnic cleansing, land dispossession has reached the stage of what Ilan Pappy calls incremental genocide. And it's all along been, with the Zionist project, it has been the colonial settler project of Zionism, aided and abetted first by the British and later by the Americans, all pursuing not their love of the Jews, but their own global strategic interests. We know that dispossession of people's land and rights creates repression, creates resistance. And we know that international law recognizes the right of a people to resist to the extent of taking up arms. And that was the case with us, and it's been the case with the Palestinians. It was the case with the Americans who rose up with guns against the British Crown. We see this throughout history. What the Israelis attempt to justify with their state terrorism, they call self-defense. But the prescription for peace and justice is quite simple, as shown in South Africa. And we've been through that process, and we know that you can't get away with dividing people, with offering Bantustanes, that there's only one solution, and that is you recognize the people's right to self-determination and independence, and that's the basis for real negotiations. Inherent in any form of racist inclusivity is the ultimate degeneration of morality. We saw this with the apartheid doctrine, and we're seeing it within Israel and unfortunately amongst its privileged people. Zionism has debased humane Jewish values, causing incalculable harm. And there are a growing number of Jews in our country and internationally who have seen this and are becoming more and more averse to what Israel is doing in their name. We unfortunately have recently seen in Cape Town at its Leah school an incident in which 2 students have been punished for refusing to stand when the Israeli national anthem was sung. And the school has threatened them for their activity. There are a number of things I would like to say. Firstly, those school authorities have demonstrated contempt for what Jewish culture has been famous for in the past, and that is open-mindedness, tolerance, and encouragement of independent thinking and freedom of expression. Secondly, they treat the students' action as shameful, yet the bending of the knee is totally passive and peaceful, a very dignified, non-violent demonstration of dissent. Those young people did not behave like wild bulls in a china shop, and their dignity, the way they protested, acts as an example to others and need to be applauded. Thirdly, I'm sure many South Africans were shocked to learn that the national anthem of another country is force-fed to young people attending these Herzliya schools. I wonder what they would say if German language schools, which we have here, or Portuguese or Italian language schools, suddenly broke out in their national anthems. What would happen? I mean, this is the cause for division and hatred amongst people. And I'm sure that Muslim-inclined schools or our madrasas do not sing the Saudi or the Egyptian national anthems. Perhaps those students accepted the singing when they first joined the school. But who doesn't see today what Israel's behavior is tantamount to? What the Herzliya authorities, the teachers, the parents need to understand is that students there cannot ignore what Israel is doing. The extreme brutality that we all know of, which is so shameful, utterly shameful. And if you are a thinking young Jew, you are not going to be immune from such events we see on our TV screens. And as much as you might be brainwashed into thinking about your own tribe and its survival against terrorism, if you've got any empathy in you, you're going to start seeing the lies that are told, the way the Palestinians are misrepresented, and the fact that in fact there is a way out of a conflict if there was the recognition of the Palestinians' legitimate rights, their human rights, and so on. And Netanyahu and all of those before him have never wanted to regard the Palestinians, the indigenous people going back to Canaanites, as having the right to live there. They'll give me the right, well, they once would have, now they ban me from the country. But any Jew who wants to go there can be accepted, who's never seen the place. And people who have lived there, be they Druze or Bedouin, Arab, Christian, Palestinian, Islamic faith, whatever, or even non-believers, you have no entitlement. You can't get land, you can't even enlarge your house, which more than not is under threat of destruction. And that's why Archbishop Tutu had said, after being there, that what our people went through under apartheid is actually child's play to what the Palestinian people are having to face. And you see, the young students at Herzliya, they will be aware of Netanyahu and what Zionism is reaching out to, the alliances they're making today, the people they invite are ultra right-wing racists and fascists from countries like this new person from Brazil, first country he wants to visit is Israel, or the dictators of Poland and Hungary, and of course Mr. Trump with all his mouthings about people of colour. And then their infatuation with the Christian evangelical movement, which is Israel's new best friend. People who put to shame the Christian faith. People who see in their minds that the answer to the world's problem would be the second coming. And that the second coming, of course, would see Jews perishing unless they became converts to Christianity. These are the people who the Zionists and Netanyahu are now courting. Who at Herzliya can be unaware of Israel's new basic law, passed in July, which declares that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people and they have an exclusive right to national self-determination, contemptuously disregarding the 20% of the country Israel, that is, Palestinian population within Israel itself, all those Christians, the Bedouin, the Druze, and so on. And now African immigrants and refugees desperately seeking sanctuary there, as the Jews once did. They are being cast out. This is what Zionism has done to a people, a Jewish faith, whose heart was once open in empathy to humanity. I'm speaking here to the mindset of those at Herzliya and beyond, the authorities, the teachers, etc., the parents of the community I come from. And I'm speaking about that Zionist establishment which hypocritically prattles on about learning the values of Nelson Mandela's reconciliation, of the need for freedom of speech and expression, and who won't so much as utter a word of condemnation when Israel's snipers at the Gaza fence cut down a man in a wheelchair or a nurse providing medical attention to the injured. So what the Prime Minister Netanyahu says in the declaration is this is a defining moment in the annals of Zionism in the history of the state of Israel. But this idea of the Jewish-only state has had Jews, some in Palestine, Israel, and many around the world hanging their heads in shame. And those young Jews we refer to, I am sure, are awakening to the truth and are no longer prepared to be bullied and brainwashed. They put to shame the intolerant values Herzliya appears intent on enforcing. In such action we see hope. And looking beyond and coming to this flag, we see great hope for Palestine. And we see it in the indomitable spirit of the people, of their resistance. When a young schoolgirl aged 15 strikes an Israeli soldier in the face and is prepared to go to jail because they have shot her cousin. When people of Gaza march on the fence, as they will be doing today, Imam, every Friday, knowing full well that the snipers will cut down, like last week, 6 of them, or 30 of them, or 60 of them. They prepare to go because they refuse, as our people once refused, to live on their knees. And they're standing up for their rights, and they will go on doing so. This is the Palestinian Samud, the indestructible spirit of perseverance, going back for aeons. Like the black people of South Africa who liberated the whites, so the Palestinians will liberate all who live in the Holy Land, the Jews included, who I would hope would one day follow the example of Ilan Pape and Yuri Davis, who came and spoke here I think in about 2002, declaring themselves Palestinian Jews. So may I end by calling for two things, calling on us here, calling on our country and our government. Firstly, make BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions, a powerful tool, as was the case during the struggle against racist South Africa, to isolate Israel until change comes. Secondly, we must pressurize our government, because it's a government I belong to, and I'm not happy when it talks with two tongues. We must pressurize this government to take a bold stand and boycott apartheid Israel in toto. And that means breaking off diplomatic relations, no Israeli ambassador here or ours there, no trade between the two countries, stand by the Palestinian people and those Jews who want change. And that was the lesson which Mandela and the ANC and our movement taught the world and learned from the world. That's what helped make us free, that kind of solidarity. Those are contributions that can help bring about the kind of change that helped free South Africa. I really believe that Palestine will be free for all people of all faiths, from the river to the sea. Inshallah, God willing, it will happen. Thank you very much.